Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really tough subject, synthesizing the source material around the killing of Sam Nordquist in New York back in 2025.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. The details are extensive, covering a pretty harrowing timeline, a complex investigation, and then this significant legal debate that emerged after.
Right. So our mission for you, the listener, is to get beyond just the headlines here. We want to, structure the sequence of events, understand the truly disturbing details of the abuse that came out in the prosecution reports.
They're quite graphic.
They are. And then analyze the legal friction, particularly around the charges. Why first-degree murder versus, say, a hate crime designation? It requires a really careful look.
Absolutely. And just a heads up, the material we're discussing involves extreme violence and torture over several months. So we're going to synthesize the facts. Nordquist's background, the early warning signs.
Missed interventions.
Definitely. The missed interventions, the crime itself, and this crucial discussion about how the law deals with such cruelty, especially when you have overlapping issues like potentially intimate partner violence and gender identity.
Okay, so let's start with Sam Nordquist himself. From the sources, he was 24, a biracial transgender man from Red Wing, Minnesota.
Described as kind, outgoing. He worked at a group home for disabled individuals back in Minnesota and Little Canada, seemed very close with his family.
And then he makes this move. He leaves Minnesota September 28th, 2024.
Yeah, initially just for 2 weeks, supposedly. Going to Geneva, New York to meet someone he'd met online, Precious Arzwaga, who was 38.
But he didn't come back after 2 weeks. He decided to stay to work on the relationship.
And it seems like not long after that decision, the contact with his family started to become strained.
Yeah, they lost touch completely after January 1st, 2025. And his mother mentioned that in their last conversations, he sounded really distressed. Her words were not like himself.
Which is a huge red flag. And this leads right into a really critical point from the sources. The attempts to intervene that failed.
Right. The family got worried. They asked for wellness checks multiple times in the months before he was officially reported missing.
But according to the family, local police declined those early requests.
Declined them. And it wasn't just the family sounding the alarm. There's this reference his mother made to an email from Ontario County Social Services.
From December 2024.
Yeah, December. Confirming they'd actually talked to Sam about needing an escape plan.
An escape plan.
Yeah.
So the authorities knew he felt unsafe.
Exactly. But apparently there was no follow-up when he didn't return to their offices as planned.
So you have family and social services identifying serious danger, but the systems just didn't seem to respond effectively.
It's a major part of this story, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It really sets a grim stage for what happened next.
Okay, so let's shift to the investigation itself. The abuse, according to reports, happened over a prolonged period, mainly between December 2024 and early February 2025.
And the location was this place, Patty's Lodge Motel in Hopewell, New York. Sam was reportedly living there in a room with at least one of the suspects.
Right, and the situation wasn't really uncovered until February 9th, 2025.
That's when the family finally filed an official missing persons report.
Which then prompted a wellness check. And when police went to that motel room, they found evidence, serious evidence of abuse.
And to really understand the charges that came later, we have to acknowledge just how horrific the details are. Captain Kelly Swift of the New York State Police, she called it one of the most horrific crimes she'd ever investigated.
Yeah, she emphasized the prolonged nature of it all, physical and psychological torture involving multiple people.
The court documents they're hard to read. They detail systematic cruelty, beatings with sticks, belts, even dog toys, ropes.
Denying him food and water, basic necessities. And then acts apparently designed to just completely dehumanize him.
Like forcing him to consume waste materials, tobacco juice, pouring bleach on him.
An incredibly violent sexual assault with objects. A table leg, a broomstick. It's just brutal.
The authorities believe the abuse ended around February 2nd, 2025. That's the suspected date of death.
And then, not long after, February 13th, human remains thought to be Sam's were found.
Yeah, discovered in a field like 50 miles away in Yates County. Hidden.
Which indicates a clear attempt to conceal the crime. All that planning, the concealment, it points toward the severity of the eventual charges.
So the arrests started happening pretty quickly after that initial discovery at the motel. Between February 9th and February 20th, 7 suspects were arrested.
Ages ranging from 19 to 38. And that group included Precious Arzwaga, the online girlfriend.
The initial charge was second-degree murder with depraved indifference.
But that changed. On March 5th, the charges were significantly upgraded.
Big upgrade to first-degree murder, plus first-degree kidnapping and second-degree conspiracy.
And that wasn't all. 4 of them got charged with first-degree aggravated sexual abuse. 6 with concealment of a human corpse.
And maybe the most sickening part, the child endangerment charges.
Yeah, the prosecution stated that 2 children, just 7 and 12 years old, were allegedly forced to witness and sometimes even participate in the torture.
Just awful. Arzuaga was specifically charged with coercing them. That detail just adds another layer of depravity.
It really does. And looking into the suspects' backgrounds, the sources mention some disturbing histories.
Right. At least 3 had prior convictions. Patrick Goodwin, for example. Convicted child sexual abuser, released just the year before, in 2023.
And Kyle Sage. Also, previous convictions, grand larceny, distributing pornography to a minor. He was released in May 2024.
Even Precious Arzuaga had a record. Trespass, larceny, and an animal cruelty charge from 2016.
So this pattern of prior offenses among some suspects, it paints a picture of the dangerous environment Sam had found himself in.
Okay, so with this level of violence, this prolonged torture, the case obviously sparked a national conversation, especially around anti-trans violence. Which brings us squarely to the controversy over the hate crime designation.
Exactly. LGBTQ plus advocacy groups, understandably, pushed hard for prosecutors to add hate crime charges.
But the Ontario County District Attorney's Office decided against it.
And they gave specific reasons. They said they didn't find direct evidence the motive was specifically bias against his gender identity or race.
They pointed out that the people involved knew each other, that Sam lived with at least one defendant.
And significantly, that some of the defendants themselves identified as LGBTQ plus ZAP, which, complicates the typical understanding of a hate crime motive originating from outside a community.
The assistant DA, Kelly Wolford, really laid out their legal thinking. She basically argued that calling it just a hate crime wouldn't capture the full scope of what happened.
Her quote was pretty direct. To limit us to a hate crime would be an injustice to Sam. She felt the crime was so much bigger than just bias motivation.
So this raises a really important legal distinction for you, the listener, to understand. Is focusing on first-degree murder in this context actually a stronger legal approach than pursuing a hate crime charge?
In a case with this kind of extreme documented cruelty, arguably yes, from a purely prosecutorial standpoint. A hate crime is technically an enhancement. It focuses on the discriminatory motive.
Okay.
But first-degree murder in New York, especially under the circumstances alleged here, torture, kidnapping, sexual abuse, carries incredibly severe penalties, often life without parole. It focuses on the horrific nature and intent of the actions themselves.
So the prosecution essentially chose the path that focused on the undeniable acts of extreme violence and control.
Exactly. The kidnapping, the torture, the sexual abuse, the child endangerment, things they felt they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt, leading to the maximum possible sentence, rather than getting potentially bogged down in proving a specific bias motive, which the relationship dynamics made more complex.
Even though advocacy groups like GLA and the New Pride Agenda made the valid point that hate and bias can be perpetuated by anyone, regardless of their own identity or relationship to the victim.
Right. And the NYC Anti-Violence Project pointed out how anti-trans violence often intersects with things like racism and intimate partner violence. It's rarely simple. But the DA went for the charges they likely felt were most legally secure and carried the heaviest penalty based on the documented evidence of the acts themselves.
Okay, let's talk about the aftermath. The public reaction was pretty immediate. Vigils popped up.
Yeah, in his hometown, Red Wing, Minnesota, but also in New York, near where it happened in Canandaigua, and even at the Minnesota State Capitol, hosted by legislative caucuses.
We saw statements from high-profile politicians, too. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called it deeply disturbing.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul pledged state support to get justice, and local officials, like Rochester City Council members, reaffirmed commitments to trans rights.
But amidst all that, Sam's mother, Linda Nordquist, was obviously heartbroken, but also really angry.
Understandably. She spoke about her son being kind and outgoing, but she heavily criticized law enforcement.
Specifically for not acting on those earlier calls for wellness checks. She felt they didn't do their jobs when she was raising the alarm.
That sense of systemic failure really came through in her statements, and there was even a bit of a media stir, wasn't there?
Yeah, the sources noted the New York Times changed its headline about Sam's death. Initially transgender man, then just man, then person.
Which sparked discussion, especially from groups like GLA, about the right way to report on victims of anti-trans violence, about respecting identity even in tragedy.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really maps out the sequence. The initial hope, the descent into isolation and abuse, the horrific details of the crime, the institutional failures.
And crucially, the legal strategy behind those very serious charges, focusing on the sheer brutality, the kidnapping, the torture, the use of children to secure the most severe classifications possible under the law.
You should now have that comprehensive picture, the events, the charges, and that complex debate between the legal definition of the crime and the broader social context of bias and violence.
It really highlights how complex these cases are, where different frameworks, criminal statutes, hate crime laws, intimate partner violence awareness, all intersect and sometimes compete in the effort to find justice.
And it leaves us with this final thought. This whole tragedy seems punctuated by missed opportunities for intervention. The family's calls, that social services note about an escape plan. What does this failure tell us about the effectiveness of our safety nets, police, social services, community support, especially for isolated, vulnerable adults? And what concrete changes are needed to ensure these kinds of red flags, particularly in complex situations involving control and potential intimate partner violence, are never, ever ignored again? Something for you to really think about.